Perfect Pairings, episode 2, lower extremity, knee dominant and hip dominant, or quads and glutes and hamstrings. So yeah, I'm going to run through 6 movements total, putting them in those 2 categories, giving easy, intermediate and hard. Advantages, I've said in the previous video, episode 1, I've given the benefits and the reasons for the series. Basically the non-competing movements, so we can superset the movements. It's kind of like a density style of training. So we're just getting tons of work in a short space of time. Depending on how program is set up for these movements, variables such as sets, reps, you're either advantages are muscle gain or fat loss. But most importantly, I'm just giving you them because they are very complementary, to each other. So run through the movements, check them out, and this is episode 2. Thank you. Okay, first up in the hip hinge or glutes hamstring dominant category. Starting easy, just like the other, just as we run through this series, it's going to be easy, intermediate, difficult. So yeah, first up is a supine hip thrust. I'm choosing to do this one. It's actually called a cook lift. After Gray Cook. Google the guy, is top notch, knows his stuff. So I'm doing it with this knee hug, which is putting this hip into flexion. So the idea behind this is it forces the opposite hip, the hip that's pushing into extension, it just basically forces that to work a little bit harder and enables you to really kind of like decipher which muscle group you're using to perform the movement. It also puts you in a better position in your lumbar spine and forces you to use your erectors less, your lower back less, and more your glute and hamstring for the movement, which is exactly what we should be using. So you don't want to go too aggressive on the knee hug. Going too aggressive is really going to lock the opposite hip down, and you might not even find out you might find out you can't get much distance at all off the floor, which is obviously what we don't want. So back off a little bit as far as how aggressively you are hugging the knee. I'm just going to come to the right side now. It's maybe a better angle to show. So yeah, it's glute, hamstring, calves in there as well. I'm going with the toe up on the work side, on the work leg, driving through the heel, which is just going to allow me to fire all this, mainly hamstring and glute, get this involved more. A good application is you imagine pulling this heel back underneath you as you're going through the hip hinge, the hip thrust. It's going to allow you might get a bit more hamstring in there, and you actually will get more hamstring because my head is on the same level as the foot contact. So it's kind of a bit more hamstring going on other than, as opposed to the glute. So yeah, making 4 or 5 reps on each side. It's a good prep drill. If you're about to start a deadlifting session or any sort of kind of like compound hip hinge pattern, glute hamstring, it's good just for preparation as well. So that's the first move. Next is intermediate. There we go. So, okay, the difference between, or the main difference between this and the previous movement is, well, as you can see, my head and shoulders are now going to be elevated. Yeah, sorry, forgive the crudeness of the equipment I'm using here. Um, I could use a bench, or you could use a bench, you could use a box. This is kind of a low, well, yeah, it's kind of a low sort of elevation deficit here with the end of the treadmill, but you don't want to go too high on it. It's almost kind of like the maximum height would be essentially like the length of your tibia or lower leg, knee to ankle. That would ensure that you, when you're in that nice flat shoulder, hip, knee, you are in terminal hip extension. Anyway, so we're getting more glute involved in this variation because of the elevated head and shoulders. Am I going toe to shin? Yeah. Okay. So toe to shin again. I think for me, because I've got longer legs, I just always use this toe to shin as opposed to feet flat. I just feel like I can get more glute. I can kind of like fire that muscle group a lot better. Coaching cues on this. I always like to coach rest ahead on the bench or whatever the surface is you're bridging up to when the hips are high, and really sync the head with the hip as you go through the pattern. You can see my head moves perfectly in time with my hip. Why do I cue this? Your cervical part, your spine, your neck and your lumbar, they have such a close relationship that kind of being out of position up here can sometimes throw this out as well. Not for everybody, and I think at some point I do elevate my head to show that variation. It's kind of personal preference as well. I'm still driving through the heels. I'm still trying to pull the heels back underneath me. This is such a great movement. You can load it up easily, barbell over the hips, dumbbell over the hips. Obviously, single leg and all that. But it's more glute. It's more glute based. You should find more glute than hamstring than the previous movement. Yeah, so I've elevated the head now. Some people just prefer to be in that position as they go through the pattern. Also depends on how many reps you're doing as well. If you're doing like 20 reps, your neck can really start to feel some discomfort in it. You don't want it to compromise the movement. So using the surface to rest on can be a nice little help. So ribs are down. I've got that good connection. Last rib and hip, or ASIS. Yeah, just hip and ribs. I've got a nice flat going on through here. I'm making sure I'm finishing in full hip extension. Glutes are real tight in that finished position. Yeah, that's the intermediate. So progression from the last movement, and kind of easier to load up as well. Okay, next. Right, the third in this hip hinge series, hip dominant, glute dominant category is, okay, we're all the way up to the deadlift. So I just want to kind of preface this by saying, I mean, this could spend like 6 hours teaching the movement or going through the movement. It seems a bit cruel to just spend, a minute or two trying to coach through it. But I'm not trying to coach you exactly how to do the movement, to eventually achieve like a 600-pound deadlift or something. But this is a great progression from the last movement, just taking you into that upright position and starting to go through some of those famous classic deadlifting, heavy deadlifting patterns. I don't know why, but I'm doing this with two kettlebells bound together. I should have done it with a single, if I'm honest. Actually, but I showed you the double because it is good if you're in a gym, like I'm in this gym here, and they only have these set amount of kettlebells, and it's good that they have a pair of kettlebells. Some gyms don't. But sometimes, like, I think this is £50. It's just too light, it's just too light of a kettlebell, and and sometimes it's hard to work up with resistances that you don't have access to. So this is kind of like a neat little way to add a bit of weight and, you know, bring the kettlebells together, make it a bit more manageable to use. So anyway, that being said, set up on it, I'm hip width with my feet, maybe a little bit outside, because these can kind of get, because of the nature of the handles, it can get a bit kind of claustrophobic when you stand out of the movement. But it's just a standing hip hinge pattern. Same muscle groups, hamstring and glute. All the same actions really, you know, that little posterior tuck at the top, make sure your internal hip extension, it's all in the, I'm also still in the heels, you know, I'm bearing my weight more back into the heels as I go through the movement. It's really important when you address, you know, when you're doing this particular style of deadlift, you know, make sure the kettlebell or the dumbbell or the weight is directly below you. You know, you want to just make sure that when you drop down into it and you've found your position, you found like your center of mass over it. You know, you don't want to be doing anything weird where you have to reach forward for the kettlebell. It should just be right there for you to pick up and start to lift. Okay, so I've got my neutral. I'm finding the weight in the kettlebell in order to pull and set my hips into position. I've probably got a little bit of a stretch through my hamstring. Again, I've got quite long limbs, quite long femur and that, so yeah, we're all going to be in a slightly different position when we look at this, but we should be in that nice normal spine. So find the weight, load yourself up, butt down, chest up, and then yeah, just stand out of it. You can see I'm struggling a little bit. I'm in that hip extension, but I'm kind of, you know, shoulders aren't maybe ideal just because I'm using this double kettlebell setup. And yeah, here we go, making a few reps out of it. It's a little bit, you can see more on the profile, obviously. So I'm pulling the dead weight off the floor, hence the name deadlift. You could just come mid-shin and turn it into more of a Romanian deadlift or an RDL. I have no idea why it's called the Romanian deadlift. So, like I said at the beginning, without going off on a big, you know, 30-minute coaching rant for this move, that's all I'm going to give you. So many great videos. Well, actually, I'll drop another name. Eric Cressy does a series running through deadlifting patterns. I mean, Brett Contreras, there's another name drop. He's Mr. Glute. So Google those guys. You'll be able to find some pretty thorough, detailed techniques and setups on deadlifting and hip hinge pattern. But this is the third. This is the third in the most advanced progression in this particular series that I'm doing. Yeah, give it a try. Yeah, that's about it really. Give it a try. Oh. Next I'm going to give like a bonus, kind of a bonus one for the glute, moving in a different plane. Anyway, that's next up. So I'm just going to throw this fourth thing in. Moving in the frontal plane, so side to side or lateral as opposed to forward and back, linear. Why am I saying that? Because it makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about. No, just joking. Because I think that's important to learn. You know, like the body moves in these different planes of motion, and it's good to expose it to all of them. You know, too many times people just go through same plane ranges, and you know, you're just not. Your body's more functional than that, and you should expose it to these different demands. So there you go, that's why I said that. So this is a lateral step. It's called so many things. X-band walks. That's X-band, not X-Men. So we're working into, so the previous movements, all with the hip hinge, moving in the sagittal plane, is mainly your glute max. I mean, yeah, minimus and medius are in there as well, but this is more working into your medius and your lateral stabilizers, the stabilizing muscle groups, which I think is a really important muscle group. And it just basically goes like that. The hook up, I think you can see it when I face the camera and do it in the other way. You can kind of see the setup. You can use, I've got a jump stretch band here, which I use a lot. Yeah, great piece of kit. You should definitely have it in your gym bag. But you can, the band that, here it is, the one that I kicked to the side at the beginning of the video, they're like Perform Better, I think, does them. They're just like little mini bands that you can just kind of wrap over your feet. So you could use one of those all the same. Yeah, I don't know. I just prefer to use this because you get a bit of upper body in there as well at the same time. So here's the setup. Step in. It's important that the band, as I just stepped on the band, it's slack here. We don't want too much tension in between the feet, although that probably will increase as you go through the movement. So there's a little bit of adjusting going on here. Yeah, step onto it, make sure it's slack, cross it from hand to hand. You can actually pull this over the hip as well, so you don't even have to use your hands at all, or you can lift it high. Yeah, like with a lot of these videos, I kind of go off on tangents, giving different variations because there really are so many. But I'm just giving you kind of the base, the base movement, and it's all you need really. So here we go, nice and parallel with the feet. So here are the key cues: nice and parallel with the feet, parallel to each other. Don't step outside. Sorry, don't step inside of hip width, like each rep. Like if I just kept stepping, inside hip width, this would become tighter and tighter. So at the most, I'm hip width as I'm moving, and then I'm just stepping out. You don't have to. You just basically, work to the range that you're kind of capable of, and whatever the resistance of the band is. So yeah, that's it. It won't be hard to know where you're working. What muscle group you're working through this one. Yeah, the outside of those hips are really going to start to feel it. Depending on whether I'm going left or right, one side is accelerating, one side is decelerating. So you're kind of using both of them, but in different ways depending on which direction you're going. What else? Yeah, that's it really. Upper back's pretty tight as you're going through the movement. That's a nice one to catch as well. That's the added benefit of using the big band as opposed to the small band. Another good one for preparation drill, or it's a nice one as like an active recovery drill, in between in between anything really. But if you're kind of like doing some trap bar deadlifts or some, I don't know, reverse lunges, it's a nice one just to add in there as, instead of standing at the water fountain, you can just mix this in as you go. So yeah, that's kind of like a little bonus to this glute hip series. So next up, we're gonna go through the 3 perfect pairings to it, which are all going to be knee dominant or quad dominant. Yeah, anyway, I'll tell you when we get there. Okay, next. Okay, second group of regressions. So we've just left off using our posterior chain, the back of our body, the posterior, and now we're working on the anterior, the front part of our body. So it's got to be right. It's the squat. I'm going to take you through 3 squat progressions. Similar to the deadlift, this can be talked about for hours and hours, and coached through in so many different, kind of break it down into so many different, individual movements. I'm just giving you the basics, kind of like the 101 to get you started. So, how deep should you squat? Well, as deep as your body allows you, really. I'd say I've got a reasonably good squat depth. I'm squatting to this box. So this is a box squat. It's very helpful for you to initially, when you're learning a squat, or even if you're not learning it, like just use a box all the time. You know, it's just nice as an aid and as a target, and it just keeps you honest. But it can be tricky to find the right height of box, you know, if you don't have access to certain types of equipment. So I don't know what inch box this is, but I'm squatting to it. There's my squat depth. I know that I'm in a, you know, I'm still within my squat depth range because I'm not doing the old butt wink. What the hell is a butt wink? Google it. It's basically that I'm squatting, I'm making contact up to depth, and I'm not coming out of position in my pelvis, or I'm not doing anything I shouldn't be doing with my pelvis. I've got to reach with the hands because this is just body weight, which gives me a bit of a counterbalance, which also helps me groove the pattern. When you initiate the squat from this standing position, you do it by sitting into the hips, just as I've done there. And then from there, you're just coming down and finding the box, basically. Yeah, so parallel feet. Let me see if I can forward through this just a little bit. Parallel feet are important. And, yeah, I'm going to get technical. Another good cue is, and it might be seen as an advanced cue, but you're trying to track your knees over the smaller toes whilst maintaining a parallel foot. Yeah, so it's like you're trying to screw your feet or your legs into the floor. Sounds random, but next time you're standing above a squat in that pattern, just kind of like try and envision that. So good parallel feet. Yeah, I'll reiterate again or say it again. Do use a box to squat to. It's just so helpful using that feedback. So there you go, basic squat. It's not taking me too long to talk it through. I'd love to talk more about it, but I'm going to shut up. So there you go, first move. So working through. Intermediate, the goblet squat. Love this movement. Yeah, what a great movement. So I'm using a kettlebell. You can obviously use a dumbbell, or double kettlebell, or 2 dumbbells, or whatever you want. The kettlebell is still acting as a counterbalance, just like my hands were in the box squat in the previous movement. Now I don't have the box, so I just blabbed on in the last video, you know, in the last movement. Over squat to box, over squat to box. I'm just doing this in space. I could be squatting to the box. I'm essentially reaching the same depth, achieving the same depth in my squat. It's just that I know where that is, so I don't necessarily need that feedback from the box. Anyway, everything else applies, all the same stuff. Make sure your elbows are on the inside and insides of your knees. That's another good coaching cue of keeping the knees out. So by keeping the knees out, you create that space for your elbows to be. Let me just reverse a bit. Allows your elbows to be in between the knees. No, sorry, missed it. Anyway, we'll come to the profile. There you go, elbows inside the knees. So yeah, I'm there you go. I'm about, if you move the box over here, I'm squatting to that depth. I've not got any butt wink going on. Oh, maybe a little bit. Yeah, all right, maybe a touch. So maybe I'm a little bit deeper than what I should be. So there you go. That's why you should use the box. It's just a great move. Now it's loaded, right? Now it's a weighted movement, so harder than the body weight, of course. Bit of upper back strength going on. A lot of bicep strength. People who just start out on this movement, you know, can turn around and say, "Wow, is this an arm movement?" Well, no, it's not. But just because you're not used to holding the kettlebell in this fashion, so middle intermediate move, the goblet squat, love it. Yeah, learn it. Definitely add this one in. Okay, next. And the third, I hope. There you go. And the third in the progression, all right, so I've chose like a plyo-based movement, a power-based movement. I could have just got in the rack and set a barbell, you know, and done some back squats or something, which are great. But, well, number one, you require a squat rack to do it. Again, not everybody has a squat rack. But I'm just adding this in, so it is a lot harder, I think, more for kind of technique and execution. You really have to have that squat groove nailed down before you start going through this move. A lot of knee valgus, a lot of knee knocking can happen because it's such a quick movement. It gives you less chance to recover your ankle, knee, and hip position. I'm sure that some speed people would look at this and, you know, critique my technique, but, you know, I'm not trying to, you know, this demonstration is just to include this in some sort of like a speed protocol, you know, like more of kind of like a circuit sort of fashion, or density session, or, you know, anaerobic kind of training protocol, training technique. So yeah, jump squats, plyo-based move. Okay, I didn't show a front view. So yeah, that's just once you've got your squat down, once you've got your box squat down and you're comfy with it, it's just kind of a fun move to advance to. It's not loaded up, it's all body weight, so it's going to elevate the heart rate probably a little bit more than the other movements, although it depends how much resistance you're using, especially in the goblet squat. So that's it. That was the quad. That was the third in the quad dominant series, knee dominant series of this of these perfect pairings. Give them a try. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.